All right, we are back with insider betting. We took a week off. There was no UFC last week. Finally, we got something to do on Saturday again. UFC 310 is this weekend. We got some big fights. The whole card is stacked. Usually we don't talk about the prelims. Today we're going to talk about the prelims. We're still skipping the earlies because probably not going to watch them, but the prelims and the main card are worth a watch. But first things first, Jesse, how you doing, brother?
Doing great. Hope everybody had a very nice Thanksgiving for those who celebrate. I hope you here in the States, if you guys had a nice break, or maybe you got some, if you maybe don't, you just got some time off of work. Congratulations on that. But
Yeah.
over Thanksgiving, my dad asked me, hey, are there any good fights this weekend? I said, no, we're not. We didn't even record our show this week because there are no fights. But there's a pay-per-view next week. And he's like, oh, is it worth buying? And I said, not really. It's like it's the flyweight title fight. Like there might be better ones for you to buy. And boy, was I wrong, because as I'm looking over the card, it's actually an unbelievable card. So I'm very excited to talk about it.
100%. Well, you can tell your dad he can stream it too. But Dana, if you're watching, you didn't hear that.
Yeah, no, I know. I just don't want my dad to waste his money because he's not a big UFC fan. So I'm just trying to I try to give him advice of where to spend his money for the fights.
Yeah, but no, this is a really good card, like a really good card. And appreciate the Thanksgiving plug. I'm Canadian, I forgot.
Yeah.
But happy Thanksgiving to all our American viewers, which is most of you guys.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's get into it because there's some really good fights to discuss.
This might be my favorite one.
Prelims. This might be my favorite as well. This is a massive fight. We got Randy Brown versus Bryan Battle. Bryan Battle fought on the Paris card, which you actually attended. He had probably the coldest promo that you could have post-fight there, right?
Yeah.
This should be a really interesting fight overall. Randy Brown is on a 3-fight win streak. He's beaten Zaleski Santos, Salikov, Wellington Turman. And we got Bryan Battle, who is back. Well, he was never like out of the win column. He's technically on like a 4-fight unbeaten streak. There's a no contest in there, which he was probably winning. It was he had a no contest with Angelusa, who Battle accused of quitting, which I rewatched it, and it's tough to say he quit, but he clearly didn't know like the rules. He was a minute and a half into his 5-minute break for an eye poke, and he said he can't see. And as soon as you say you can't see, the doctor stops it, but you have another 3.5 minutes to be able to see again. So it was kind of a shame. I know Bryan was pretty upset about that, but hey, he beat Kevin Jousset in his last fight in Paris, who was Kevin is French. So that was a nice win for him. And Bryan Battle, he's the definition of hard work beats talent. The guy used to be 300 pounds. Mm-hmm. He cut down to 185, which is where he fights now. And yeah, he's
170 welterweight
or 170. Sorry. Yeah. But I think he walks around a 185, give or take, most likely. Yeah. And yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting fight. I think Randy Brown is probably the more technical striker when you break it down, but I think Bryan Battle is just relentless. I think he's going to keep the forward pressure. I think he's going to make it scrappy. He's going to make it a brawl, and technical fighters struggle against that, So yeah, it'll be interesting. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this fight, bro?
No, I thought that was actually a great way of putting it. The technical strikers struggle against the guys that kind of make it dirty a little bit. And Bryan Battle, it's all in his name. He battles. He likes to make it dirty. I interviewed him after his win at UFC Paris, and he's hilarious. He is soaking up the fame that he has gotten from his recent success.
As he should.
He was after flipping off the Paris crowd and, talking shit, putting on a WWE style promo after winning the fight. Totally turning heel in Paris. It was awesome. And it kind of like a Star is Born moment for Bryan Battle. This is like the big test for him. It's a huge step up in terms of competition. Randy Brown is an elite striker and a guy that, has all the tools to actually go on like a real run at welterweight. So I agree. Make it as dirty as possible on Randy Brown. That's how, guys like Bilal beat Leon. And I'm not saying that Bryan battles anything like Bilal, but I'm just saying when you have a guy that likes to keep things clean, likes to keep things at range, you have to make it uncomfortable for them. And I think Bryan will do that because he kind of has he's sort of like Strickland in a way where he has a tendency to kind of turn things into a little bit of a sparring match. And if you can do that and kind of get in there and make it ugly, make it a little dirty, do some dirty boxing, you can, I think this fight feels like a decision, if I'm being honest. I don't see a knockout in this fight. I'm feeling a decision for Bryan Battle, and I would bet him money line or decision is my pick.
Yeah, I agree with that take. I don't really see a knockout in this fight either. And no, it's by far his biggest test. Randy Brown seems to beat the people he's supposed to beat and lose people he's supposed to lose to. So yeah, it'll be an interesting scrap. Brown's got losses against Jack Della Maddalena. He's got losses against Bilal Muhammad, like you mentioned, Vicente Luque. So all respectable fighters,
And I would say UFC would want Battle to win. Like if in a perfect world for them, just because he is so charismatic and fun on the microphone, that if he could go on a little bit of a run here, I think they'd be very happy with that.
I 100% agree with you. Moving on to the next fight we have, though. We got Mosvar Evloev versus Aljamin Sterling. Very interesting fight. I'm kind of, we talked about it before we jumped on here, but kind of surprising that this fight is on a prelim. It feels like it should be maybe the main card opener or just on the main card in general, but the main card does have some decent fights, so I understand why he's not there. This is, I believe, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. I'll save it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I believe this is Aljo's second fight as a featherweight against Mosvar, right? His last fight was in featherweight as well.
Yeah, Calvin Kattar. That was his first one. Yeah, Kattar.
Yeah. So he beat Calvin Kattar. Aljo is referred to by Sean O'Malley as the greatest bantamweight of all time. This fight was originally booked for 307, but I think Aljo sustained some sort of injury during sparring. I don't know if it was ever disclosed what the injury was. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're at right now. This is an interesting fight because in a way it feels like it's potentially a title eliminator somewhat. I don't want to say that with a ton of confidence. It's a title eliminator for Evloev. I think he's 8-0 in the UFC. He's 18-0 overall. The interesting thing about Evloev is, well, it's not really interesting. It's actually kind of boring, but all his fights in the UFC have gone to decision. Coming into the UFC, he was 10-0 and he had 7 finishes and only decisions. But since then, he's only gone decisions. But it's just kind of the way he fights. This will probably be a very technical fight on the ground, which will make it for the average fan a boring fight. But there is something to watch here. So anyway, I do think Evloev will take it. He's a -258 favorite for a reason. It is his biggest test, in my opinion. He's beaten Diego Lopez, but it was back when Diego Lopez wasn't who he is now. I think since then, Diego Lopez has gone on a 5-5 win streak. But anyway, I got Evloev. I don't think Aljo's going to be able to pull it out. But yeah, how do you break it down?
I mean, to the people that are confused about this fight being on the prelims, I think that it's impossible to justify when you have a fight like Kron Gracie versus Bryce Mitchell on the main card, which I think is where a lot of the outrage comes from on this particular subject, because you got Kron Gracie coming off of what he himself admitted was the worst performance of his career. And then Bryce Mitchell coming off of getting brutally knocked out by Josh Emmett. We're going to break that fight down, but it seems like pretty vicious disrespect to Aljamain Sterling, if I'm being honest. And Evloev, even in his interview today, said that the reason why they're fighting on the prelims is probably because of Aljamain Sterling, which is crazy to say about a guy that is considered by Sean O'Malley to be the best bantamweight of all time. It's a crazy thing to say. Absolutely crazy thing to say. This fight should be on the main card. It feels like an indictment on Sterling by the UFC. They would deny that. But what I'll say about this fight in particular, a lot of times when you have guys that are two wrestlers fighting each other, you might think, oh, it's going to be a wrestling match. Well, it's quite possible that the wrestling offsets each other, and this could end up just being a fight on the feet. Now, that could also be boring, where there's a lot of clinch work and there's not a lot of striking involved, because neither one of these guys are particularly good strikers. I would give the edge to Mosvar in that case.
Same.
This is a huge test for Evloev, and I think that Aljo can grapple with anybody. So I'm with you. I do think that Evloev is a good favorite, but I would say this might be the best high value underdog on the card, because just of truly how good and how special Sterling really is in terms of grappling and wrestling. So if you want to put a sprinkle on Sterling, by decision or by submission, I wouldn't fault you for it, but I would bet Evloev decision would be my pick. So
yeah, I like how you brought up the Bryce Mitchell and Kron Gracie example. I think what the UFC is probably envisioning is, I think they want to see as many finishes on the main card as possible. And I think that the Bryce Mitchell versus Gracie fight is more likely to end this in a submission than this fight. And I think that's what they're going for.
Yeah, but I think it's a similar style is the problem.
It's the exact same style.
It's like it's the same type of fight. It's wrestlers fighting each other. It's like, but it's a jiu-jitsu guy fighting a wrestler, whereas in this fight, it's two wrestlers fighting each other.
Yeah. So we'll see. It'll, for the average fan, again, this will probably be a snooze fest, but it will be interesting because this fight really matters a lot for the rankings.
Yeah, and I agree. If Evloev can get like a finish on Aljamin Sterling, I think that he'll probably be fighting for the title. But if it's a decision, it might be kind of tough. It might be a boring decision fight. It might be kind of tough.
I agree. Moving on to the next fight. Another one I'm excited for. I'm telling you, dude, I think there's so many exciting fights on this card. I'm going to keep saying that after every opener here. But we got Themba Gorimbo versus Vicente Luque. Vicente Luque is coming off of a loss to Joaquin Buckley. He had a win before that against RDA, and then he had 2 losses before that. But then we got Themba Gorimbo, who's on a 4-5 win streak, and he's kind of making a name for himself. Luque was supposed to fight Nick Diaz, I think is important to mention as well. But we've all seen kind of what's been going on with Nick behind the scenes a little bit. I don't want to touch too much into it, but all being said, I hope Nick is okay. But yeah, so Luque needed a new opponent. He got Themba Gorimbo. Gorimbo's been 4-0 in the UFC since losing debut. I also always have to mention the heartwarming story of Themba moving to the United States, being absolutely broke, not really like sleeping in the gym on the floor. The Rock heard his story, bought him. I think it was like a condo or an apartment, but he bought him a place to live. And Themba has lived up to the hype. He's only to become a more serious contender since. I think he's been very appreciative of the Rock's gift, and I think he's lived up to the name. He didn't let the stardom of that happening kind of affect him and his fighting game. Themba is a grapple heavy fighter. You can see he averages 4.8 takedown or 4.89 takedowns a fight. In his 5 UFC fights, he's got 17 takedowns, which is crazy. Luque, on the other hand, I feel like he beats up the old folks like him, and then he loses to everyone else. I think I know they're the same age, but Luque's just been in the UFC for so long. I lean towards Themba Gorimbo here. I think the odds are pretty accurate and how close they are, but I think Themba is going to pull out a win here. It's probably going to go to decision, I'd assume. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing on my end here.
Yeah, I'm with you. Luque was dealing with this brain bleeding issue that he had. That's why if Colby Covington calls him Brain Bleed Luque. It's a terrible nickname, but that's what he calls him. But so I was really monitoring him in his monitoring him in his last fight against Buckley. I didn't like the way Luque looked, which is why I feel like that was the Nick Diaz fight was booked to begin with, is because it was just based on the trajectory of the way Luque was going. It felt like a little bit of a lighter matchup, a guy where he wasn't going to get knocked out. Yeah, like he wasn't going to get knocked out in that fight kind of deal. Like even if he loses, he's not going to, there's something, take it a little easy on him. I'm not saying I think he's going to get knocked out in this fight, but just in terms of like trajectories, I just didn't like the way Luque looked against Buckley. And in terms of like physicality, I think he's going to struggle with the physicality of Gorimbo. Decisions, I'm looking at it here. Decisions a plus 125 for Gorimbo. So if you feel like taking that chance, you want to get a little extra juice.
What do they have on decision or submission?
So submission is plus 1,000. TKO
But
is plus 500.
Gotcha. But what do they have on like, you know, like the double odds where it's like submission or decision, you get the win?
Yeah. So where is that? Winning method. Sorry.
No, you're good. I think it's under the prop bet.
Yeah, submission or decision is a minus 110.
Oh, okay. So you're not getting too many.
KO or decision is minus 135. So it's like if you feel like just going money line at minus 162, you're not gaining a lot, but plus 125 decision, you know, might be where my head is at here.
Yeah. Yeah. A knockout is interesting, but I don't know. Because I think Themba more so like pieces you up, but like lightly. He picks his shots, you know, and you can tell by the stats. He lands
ground and pound has potential for like a TKO here.
True.
Like maybe not a clean knockout, but a ground and which would still count as a plus 500.
Of course.
So
yeah. No, it's interesting. Who do you have in the end here? You also go with Themba?
Themba. Yeah, I'm taking Themba.
Yeah. Dominick Reyes versus Anthony Smith. It's the feature prelim of the night, which is also going to be a great fight. Obviously, Dominick Reyes, he went on a losing skid. He lost to Jon Jones, which was a controversial fight. And then he lost, which everyone said he beat Jon Jones, including Dana White back in the day. And I know you're a heavy believer in that as well.
Dana White wants to erase that clip from his memory, from history. He doesn't want he hates that exists on the internet.
Yeah. So it's crazy how one bad decision changes a trajectory for a single fighter, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. One bad loss. He went on 3 losses. He took 2 years off, came back, and then he beat Dustin Jacoby with a TKO in the first round. And I know that made a lot of fans happy. Anthony Smith, on the other hand, he can't keep a streak alive, whether it's losing or winning. He's gone loss, win, loss, win, loss. He's lost to the likes of Roman Dolidze, Khalil Roundtree, Johnny Walker, and then he's been Vitor Petrino and Ryan Spann in his last 5. I do think that he's going to go on a 2-fight losing skid after this fight. I do have Dominick Reyes. I think he's going to be too much for Anthony Smith. I think Anthony Smith is taking that. He's still a great fighter, but he's become more of a, what's it called? Like not a spokesperson, like a reporter at this point, you know, on his ESPN stuff.
A TV personality, I guess.
TV personality. Yes, those are the words I was looking for. So he's become a TV personality. He's already looking at what he's going to be doing past his fighting career, and he's found it. Again, still a great fighter, still has a chance of winning. But I think overall, Dominick Reyes has more power. I think he's going to land more shots. I think he's got a chance for a knockout. He's got great takedown defense. I think he's just going to be better all around. And I think we're probably going to, I don't know if I want to call it like a knockout here. It might go to decision just because Anthony Smith is pretty solid, but I could very easily see a knockout in this fight as well.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony Smith is a dog, so like I wouldn't be surprised if it goes all the way. It's only 3 rounds.
Exactly.
And so I really like this fight for Reyes for like a number of reasons. I really like him in any fight against a guy that's like not probably at risk to knock him out. And because I do think he's become a little chinny since getting knocked out multiple times the past few years, which I think has done more to him than the Jon Jones thing. But again, he probably doesn't get those matchups if he gets the correct decision against Jon Jones. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It might have just ended up being a rematch against Jon Jones, is what most likely would have happened. So let's keep that in mind. What I'll say about this fight, I think KO is definitely in the cards. It's a minus 125 for him to win by KO or TKO. So Vegas is right there with you. Decisions plus 275.
It's not far off.
It's not far off. I was considering a Smith sprinkle here, but I kind of just agree. I just feel like this fight just favors Reyes too much that I'm not even going to consider a sprinkle on Smith. But I really, really do like this fight, and I really hope that Reyes goes on a little run here because I think he's earned it. I hope he does.
Yeah, it feels like they're kind of trying to build him back up very slowly, and I think
Yeah.
he deserves that treatment from the UFC, right?
Mhm.
So,
He
but
was,
yeah,
just don't forget, man, he was a bulldozer at one point. Like, he was one
he
of the
was.
most impressive light heavyweights in the world, arguably he was the best one other than John Jones for like a year and a half span. So let's
And I wonder if he's still chinny, because you're right. Like, he's got 4 losses on his record, and 3 of those were by knockout.
yeah.
But then there was a 2-year gap there, which I think helps you not become unchinny, but a little bit, you know. So we'll see what happens in this fight. Let's move on to the main card though. But before we do, we have a special message from our friends at DraftKings.
All right, UFC fans, we've got another action-packed weekend of fights, and Inside Fighting has partnered up with our friends over at DraftKings because this weekend we've got Asakura making his UFC debut against Alexandre Pantoja for the UFC flyweight title. And if you want to get in on the action and you're a new DraftKings customer, go download the DraftKings Sportsbook app, bet $5, and you'll receive $150 of bonus bets if your bet hits. You can do fun things with those bonus bets, like use them on same game parlays, or if sports betting is not yet available in your state, do not worry about it. Just go play DraftKings Daily Fantasy Sports and get in on the action there. Again, if you're a new customer and you want to get in on the action, go download the DraftKings Sportsbook app, bet $5, and if your bet hits, you'll receive $150 of bonus bets by using our promo code INSIDEFIGHTING.
And we're back.
I'm rewatching that. I'm like, man, it's just, I think I'm like a little too close to the camera in those shots. I'm just like staring. I'm like staring at myself. I'm like, wow, that's
really,
like,
I actually liked it.
okay. All right.
Yeah, because I feel like I'm a little bit more lax when I do them.
Yeah, I know. I
So
just been like, whoa, that's a lot. I'm like, whoa, really catching my eye. Yeah.
well, you're getting people to bet on DraftKings
There you
with
go.
that.
That's
You're
all that
staring
matters.
right to their soul.
Mhm.
Open up the main card. We have Nate Landwehr versus Dooho Choi. And this should be a fun fight. Likely going to end up in a knockout. I think both of these fighters are going to keep the pressure up and then get hit a lot, and that typically ends in a knockout. Nate Landwehr, he's got 9 KOs out of his 18 wins. He's got 2 subs and 7 decisions. He's 5-3 in the UFC. He beat Jamal Emmers in his last fight there. Dooho Choi back in the win column. He beat Bill Algeo. It was his first win in 8 years, which is pretty crazy. He started off his UFC career 3-0. Then he kind of got rushed into some decent opponents. So he went 0-3. Then he had a draw against Kyle Nelson. And then he beat Bill Algeo. The opponents he lost to, by the way, were Charles Jourdain, Jeremy Stevens, and Cub Swanson. So again, all very decent opponents. And he came into the UFC on an 11-fight win streak. So he was like kind of put up against decent people pretty quick. Anyway, Nate, he's coming in as the favorite, but he's 36 years old, and I understand not wanting to bet on Dooho here. It's a bad bet, but I kind of am leaning towards Choi. And I think it's kind of like a heart bet. I'm picking more with my heart than my mind here, because he was on an 8-year losing skid and then he got a win. I'd love to see him keep it up. But overall, I think it's just going to be a fun fight overall. I'm happy for either of these guys to win, because I think Nate winning would also be great for him. It's kind of a whatever fight. It doesn't matter in the rankings at all. I don't think either of these guys are making any sort of title runs anytime soon. This fight would have been better for the feature prelim, I think, because it's a fun fight.
Yes.
It's a good way to end the prelims and open up the main card. But I think the UFC is looking at it, okay, let's open up the main card in a fun way, but you could have easily, like you said, put Bryce Mitchell and Kron Gracie on the prelim. You put this fight on the prelim, and then you can bump up someone like Evloev and Aljo, and even I know you could in theory bump up Dominick Reyes and Anthony Smith, and I wouldn't be upset about that. But at the same time, you could have bumped up Vicente Luque and Themba Gorimbo, because Gorimbo is making a run, and if he gets another win, he becomes not a contender, but he becomes a ranked opponent.
Yeah,
it kind of builds up the hype around him a little bit more by being on the main card versus the prelims. So again, I'm not too upset about it, but this could have very easily been the feature prelim, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, they're opening up the card with an incredibly fan-friendly fighter for like the UFC diehards. Like Nate Landwehr might not be a guy that a lot of UFC fans know, or like, you know, casual sports fans know who follow the UFC. But if you're a
Yeah.
UFC fan, you really like the sport. You love this guy. Nate Landwehr is like one of the most fun, fan-friendly fighters that the UFC has. He's got a great personality, and his fights are always bangers. He only has 9 knockouts out of his 18 wins, so he's a little 50-50 in that regard, whereas Choi, 13 of his 15 wins are by knockout. What that says to me is that this fight will end in a knockout. Whatever way you're betting, bet the knockout, just because that's the type of fight Landwehr gets his wins in, are in fights like this where it's up against like standing. But Choi also is just clearly strike first, ask questions later type of fighter. His nickname is the Korean Superboy. So he's got that. He's an exciting fighter too. So I like your take though on betting Choi. I kind of feel like you're getting some good value with him here, and I actually kind of like betting on him by knockout now that I'm thinking about it. Just because I do feel like
Plus 275.
Landwehr gets hit a lot, man. You know, 5.75 strikes absorbed. I could see TKO being like in play here, and that is what did you say it was?
It's
275.
275 for Dooho Choi to win by knockout. But if you just want to bet up knockout straight up, it's plus 110 just for like the fight to end by knockout.
I don't hate it. You could also
I don't
double
hate it
chance it
either.
potentially, but yeah, just go knockout. Bet you know, bet 10 units on knockout, see what happens. But
Yeah.
yeah, I like that bet.
Yeah.
But I am taking Choi. I agree. I am
You're taking
Choi
Choi as well.
Yeah.
Nice. Bryce Mitchell versus Kron Gracie.
Boy, look at that photo of Kron. Hey, by the way, I just want to make sure everybody's aware. Love Kron Gracie and the Gracie family. They're
100%.
legends. They're also really close with Nick and Nate Diaz, so they're big fans of those guys. But I just wanted that photo is hilarious. That's all I want to say.
No, I was gonna start off with the same way.
Yeah.
Kron Gracie, he was 4-0 coming into the UFC. He's 1-2 since, but he comes from one of the most respected families in the MMA world. From my understanding, his family is really kind of what started the UFC, you know, with the way they fight in jiu-jitsu here. Mitchell, though, coming off of the most brutal knockout I think I've ever seen. He just, I think, did he face plant forward? I think so, right? Like he just like.
I mean, he just I forget if he face planted, but he was convulsing and having like
it's terrible.
A seizure on the ground. Essentially, it was one of the scariest knockouts you'll ever see.
Yeah, and Bryce Mitchell came out and said the knockout was against Josh Emmett. I'll preempt with that. Yeah. But Bryce Mitchell came out and said massive respect to Josh Emmett. It could have been a lot worse for Bryce Mitchell. He could have been never fighting in the UFC again if Josh Emmett had some follow-up shots on him, you know, which we see very often in the UFC. You even take the last card, for example, where you had, what was her name? The doctor. I want to say it was like Shi Ming or something like that.
Oh, yeah. The doctor who got that incredible knockout. Yeah, she follow-up shots on a totally unconscious opponent.
Exactly. So it's very common, very, very common. So massive respect to Josh Emmett for kind of seeing that it was already a bad knockout. I think this is the perfect fight for Bryce Mitchell coming back. Kron Gracie has 0 knockout abilities. He's almost got 0 striking abilities. And you saw that in his last fight, which you mentioned before we jumped on, that he admitted that it was probably the worst performance he's ever put on. He's kind of scooting on the mat, the BJJ way. I think that Bryce Mitchell, the interesting thing about him is that we all know how good he is on the ground. And you see that he only averages 3.45 takedowns on average per fight. And that's because he keeps ground control. He doesn't have to repeatedly take you down. He doesn't have to spam it. He knows how to keep you on the ground. And he knows how to control you there. Obviously, Kron Gracie is very good on the ground. But I think what the UFC is trying to do here is before Bryce Mitchell got knocked out, he was still kind of hyped up to be like a future star in the UFC. Obviously, he had the loss against Ilia Topuria, but Ilia, we've seen what he's become since, you know, where Josh Emmett hasn't really made much since knocking out Bryce Mitchell. long story short, I think they're trying to build him up. I think they're trying to get him back in the win column. I think he's probably going to do it. He's a minus 800 favorite for a reason. And yeah, we'll probably see a Bryce Mitchell win here. I don't know if it's going to go to a finish, to be honest. It might just go to decision, but it's a Bryce Mitchell win nonetheless.
I agree. I'm taking Bryce. It's so interesting because before that fight happened, that fight with Josh Emmett was actually a short notice replacement fight. I believe it was supposed to be Josh Emmett versus Giga Chikadze. I believe, I don't know if you just mentioned that, but I believe he filled in on Bryce filled in on short notice for that fight. It was like 2 weeks notice, comes in and gets the worst knockout of his career. That's important to remind people of when they talk about him in this regard, because before that happened, he was, you know, other than losing to Ilia Topuria, where he did get beat up badly in that fight, other than losing to Topuria, Bryce Mitchell was on a trajectory of like kind of becoming a star in the UFC. He really was. And he's a great personality, whether what you think that what he says is insane or not, like whether you think that he says crazy, stupid things about flat earth theory and about the Bible or whatever it is that you hear him say, it's irrelevant to the fact that he's incredibly popular. He does numbers for the UFC. Take it from me as somebody that posts things about him from time to time, and they all perform very well. They get a lot of engagement. People really like Bryce Mitchell. And you're totally right. This is a perfect fight for him because you know that he's not at risk of being knocked out. And I also think it's a good fight because it's two guys that are grappling heavy. So that means it's going to be an exciting fight. It's going to be a challenging fight. And from Kron Gracie's standpoint, you know, it's interesting because he's done some sort of reflection this week. He said in an interview that in his last fight, which, you know, kind of looked like a 1990s UFC style fight where he's just like, you know, trying to pull guard on the ground, not even just avoiding the striking. It was like the weirdest thing you'll ever see. He said that he was listening to people in his corner and in his camp, listening to them too much, that they were all convincing him that just use your jujitsu and you'll get yourself out of anything. One thing you have to remember about the Gracie family is before like the early mid 2000s, they were like the original Nurmagomedovs of UFC and MMA.
Yeah.
That's what they were. They were like the original Nurmagomedovs. They were the cream of the crop family in MMA. So, but they've had to undergo some sort of like adjustment as MMA has gotten more popular, and, you know, different styles of wrestling have come into play, different styles of striking have come into play. They've had to adapt. And I think that's what you're seeing from Kron Gracie is sort of like an era gone by. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have skills that can win this fight. That just means that if he's truly serious about the fact that he's adapted and he's implementing new things into his game, then he can beat anybody because his grappling is that good. It really is that good. Like he's an aficionado, he's a phenomenon. But he needs to adapt and work on other things in order to beat somebody like Bryce Mitchell, which I unfortunately just don't think is going to happen. Bryce by decision is minus 230. So
yeah, decision or submission was like minus 525. So you get
plus 400 odds. Submission.
Yeah. The odds makers don't really see it happening because, and that's out of respect to Kron Gracie as well.
His defense is going to be so good. You know, it's going to be tough to submit him. So, but
very,
you know, anyways, that's my take on it.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great take. And I think the main thing to just kind of add to what you said here, the reason, like you're right, Kron Gracie has to adapt to the new style of MMA, but he's 36 years old and this is his 8th professional fight, right? His record is 5-2. It's very hard to learn these new skills when you're not fighting that often.
Yeah.
So
what was it, a 4-year break between his last fight and the previous one? Is that what it was?
Something like that. Like that. But anyway, let's move to the feature fight of the night. We got Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov. This has been rescheduled from UFC 308 because Volkov had to pull out because of a knee injury. But this is actually a rematch that Ciryl Gane has previously won. Gane only has 2 losses in his professional career. He's 12-2. He's got 6 knockouts, 3 submissions, 3 decisions, and his 2 losses have come against the GOAT of MMA. That seems to be pretty unanimous at this point. And I know some people say he's got to be Tom, whatever. He's the GOAT. So he came against John Jones. And then his other loss came against Francis Ngannou, who at the time people were lining up to say that he's going to be the GOAT of the heavyweight division. So the 2 toughest opponents he's fought, he's lost to. I think what we saw is Gane get out grappled in both of those losses, although he's decent on the ground. He did get out grappled there. And we haven't seen someone outstrike him yet. A pretty crazy stat that I saw as well was in Gane's last fight against Sergey Spivak, he outstriked him 109-11. How crazy is that?
It was domination. It was.
Yeah. I don't know if we'll see that sort of domination this time around, but I do think he's going to get the win here. Again, minus 355 favorite for a reason. Gane is kind of in an interesting position. Nobody's shouting for him to go into a title fight anytime soon, but he's still the second-ranked fighter, you know? So it's going to be interesting when Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall happens, which seems right now pretty likely to happen. Maybe he gets another title shot after that. Who knows?
Yeah. It's a very interesting fight because you look back on the previous one, it was a 5-round main event decision win for Gane, which you would, you know, when you have two heavyweights, especially with one who strikes as much as Gane does, you would anticipate that it wouldn't get to the decision over 5 rounds. But Volkov is definitely the submission threat here. Gane's grappling has been called into question a lot, especially fighting Jon Jones and Ngannou. People felt like he kind of blew his shot at becoming undisputed champion against Ngannou because he went for a heel hook in that fight, and it was just a very unimpressive heel hook, and then Ngannou ended up controlling on the ground and winning. So he supposedly really worked hard on his grappling after losing to Jon Jones. We didn't get a chance to see that against Sergey Spivak, but apparently he's really worked hard on that because that's sort of like the missing piece of Ciryl Gane's game. Everything else is there. The wrestling is there and the striking is there. It's just the grappling hasn't been very good. And you wonder if he's going to need this against a guy like Volkov, who's actually been kind of a hot streak here. I mean, he beat Pavlovich, who was like the boogeyman of the division before Aspinall knocked him out. So you have to think that Volkov is a live underdog here, even though Gane is rightfully so the favorite. I'm sort of split. I know it sounds weird. I thought I was going to be picking Gane, but I kind of like have a weird feeling that Volkov is going to be some trouble. But I actually think Gane by knockout here could be a good bet just because he's got something to prove here and he really wants to get back to the title contention. And I really do think that when Jon Jones is gone from the sport, that they really, 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 really want to make the Tom Aspinall versus Ciryl Gane fight. I think that that's something that they really want to do because the two styles are so similar. So I am taking Gane and I'm interested in by knockout. I haven't looked at it yet.
Yeah. It's interesting you're going by knockout. This is a 3-round fight compared to the last fight being a 5-round fight.
I know. That's what I'm thinking is like, has there been enough time in the cage together where there's going to be some adjustments made?
Yeah.
Plus 350. So
it's not bad.
It's not bad at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying I'm going to make that bet. I'm just saying I'm interested in it. But Gane, I'm going to take to win.
Yeah, I'll back you up here a little bit. Is both of these guys are going to be able to come out hot, which in the last fight they weren't able to because they knew they had to preserve some of their energy. But considering this is only a 3-round fight, they can be a lot more explosive in this fight because they don't have to preserve as much energy anymore.
That's sort of where my head is at here, and I feel like first round we could see. Look, Ciryl Gane is always a threat for like a quick knockout, you know. So I could see it happening.
Yeah, no, I don't hate it at all. I'm curious. Do you have the odds for what a like knockout or decision is?
Knockout decision would be minus 320. So they're all over that one.
Oh, okay.
But
yeah,
knockout
so
on it. On knockout on its own is plus 350. If you feel like doing like a little round prop, Gane in round 1 is a plus 650. So just throwing it out there. Like that's when he's going to be at his most explosive. You're getting some nice little odds there. Interesting.
Co-main event, former like half main event. Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Garry. This is a very you don't see this in the UFC often. I don't think this is a title eliminator fight, in my opinion. Well, it has to be, considering that Shavkat Rakhmonov was supposed to fight for the title on this card, but Bilal Muhammad had to pull out due to his toe injury.
Dana also said this is a title eliminator fight.
It has to be. It doesn't make sense for it not to be, right? But what you don't typically see is you don't see two undefeated fighters put their undefeated record on the line for a title eliminator. Usually the undefeated streak goes on the line for the title fight, right?
Yeah.
Which is what was supposed to happen for Shavkat.
Right.
They used to train together back in the day. And I actually saw an interview with Ian Garry today where there was like rumors that Shavkat submitted him when they were training together, and there was footage of it, but Shavkat came out and said that Ian Garry's wife had the footage and he didn't want it to be posted back in the day, so she never posted it, but he says the video still exists. Ian Garry I forget who the interview was with today, but he basically said that, hey, if he's still banking on that, then he's in for some trouble because that was a long time ago. Right. But anyway, Rakhmonov, he's 18-0 with 18 finishes. He's got 8 knockouts, 10 submissions. His last fight was against Wonderboy. And before that, he beat Jeff Neal and Neil Magny. None of those are like sure, Wonderboy. All those are like respected opponents, but none of those are like title contender opponents, you know? Where Ian Garry is coming off of a very similar last 3 fights. His last fight was against Michael Venom Page, but the 2 fights before that were also against Jeff Neal and Neil Magny. So 2 of their last 3 fights were against identical opponents who they both beat. I think it's going to be a very interesting fight. Like I said, very, very weird how Ian Garry was supposed to fight Buckley next week. And he said, no, I want to fight Shavkat instead this week. Nobody else accepted, I don't think. Well, I think a couple of people accepted. There was Carlos Paredes who accepted, or rumored to have accepted the fight, but then he had to pull out due to injury. Kamaru Usman apparently also accepted the fight against Rakhmonov, but then afterwards took that back and said, no, I don't want to fight him. So for Ian Garry to kind of make this decision to fight Rakhmonov means he's very confident in his ability to beat Rakhmonov, I think, especially considering that they've sparred against each other many, many times. I think the true challenge here is going to be, can Rakhmonov take down Ian Garry? Because he's only got a 29% takedown accuracy. He's not, he shoots, but he doesn't take you down that often, you know, where he's got very good takedown defense. So if that can hold up against Ian Garry, he stands a good chance. But I don't know. I honestly, like in my notes here, I typically highlight the opponent that I pick, and here I don't have either of them highlighted because I don't know who I want to pick. The obvious answer is Rakhmonov, just with 18 finishes. I feel like he should get another one here. But at the same time, Ian Garry's also 15-0. He's 8-0 in the UFC. He's got 2 extra fights in the UFC compared to Rakhmonov here, you know, so the experience can play a role here. I know he's a plus 285 underdog compared to being a minus 360 favorite. I honestly don't know who to pick, dude. I kind of want to go with Ian Garry, but I feel like that's trying to be that like creative analyst who's like, oh, look at this underdog pick, you know, but and I feel like I should go with the obvious one, but at the same time, I don't want to go with the obvious one. I don't know. It's interesting.
No, I mean, I'm there with you because I was actually hoping you were going to pick Shavkat so I could pick Garry, just because I think that you're right, that he's very confident. The fact that he accepted the fight accomplishes a couple of different things, right? It shows how confident he is and that he believes that he's ready to fight for a title, ready to fight Bilal or whoever it would be. It would be Bilal, obviously. But it also is kind of a way of like letting the fans know that he's serious. And it kind of might be, I think he's kind of saved a little bit of his image by taking this fight. I feel like the fans kind of like respect him a little bit more now. And I want to get into that a little bit more on fight season because I do have a little piece on that plan. But I'm going to say that I think Garry has all the tools to neutralize what Shavkat does. And I think that's important to remember in terms of like styles making fights. Shavkat is like a bulldozer. He goes for finishes. He gets in dirty. Garry's very good at using his range, his takedown defense, and he implements all aspects of MMA into his game. These are two very complete fighters going up against each other. I agree. I don't know who's going to win, but I'm tempted to take Garry because I just feel like the odds are so good for him that I think this is actually more of a coin flip fight than people realize. That it might actually be more of like a minus 120 plus 100 type of situation. That Garry is very good. He just doesn't have the incredible finishes lately that Rakhmonov does. Now, look, I could look like a total idiot. Shavkat can submit him in 2.5 minutes, and we're going to feel like morons.
Totally.
I'm taking Garry. I think Gary's going to win by decision.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to happen like in later rounds where he's just going to start like Rakhmonov is going to gas out and Gary's just going to start picking him apart, leg kicks, things like that towards the end of the fight, and just win the fight on points.
Yeah. No, and I think you're right with your analysis. Like Shavkat's going to keep the pressure up, but Ian Garry has proven to be just a very high IQ fighter. He doesn't rush into situations. He takes his time, and that's what fans have faulted him for in the past. Because fighters that people feel like he should have beaten very easily, he like took him to decision, right? Yeah. But at the same time, he's not doing it because he's doing it because he wants to win, right? That's why he's doing it. He cares about winning. He doesn't care how.
Floyd Mayweather, dude. It's just doing whatever it takes to win the fight. Yeah.
Exactly. So he doesn't need it to look pretty. He just wants to win. And that's what he's been doing. He just keeps winning. So it's interesting. It's a great co-main event, I think.
It's an awesome fight. And it's super fascinating for so many reasons. I mean, like, it's a big downgrade for Shavkat if he loses. Not that I think he's far away from a title shot if he loses, but like just from where he was to where he's going to be, it's like, what a redemption story for Ian Garry. But I'm going to save that for later.
Yeah. And you're right. Ian Garry is one of the most disrespected fighters in the UFC, just based on his whole situation with his wife and coach. But we won't touch too much into that now. Main event, we got the flyweight championship fight. Asakura. I chat GBT'd this. I was going to say this has never happened before, but apparently it's happened 4 times in the UFC. According to chat GPT. But Asakura is making his debut in the UFC against Alexander Pantoja in a title fight. Again, doesn't happen often. It's an extremely unique scenario. And what a lot of people don't realize, well, a couple things. One, Asakura is actually coming down in weight. He usually fights a bantamweight. He's fighting a flyweight for this fight, which can play a big role considering he's coming all the way from Japan, which is not a short flight, to say the least. So you have to fly across the world. You have to cut down an extra 10 pounds. It's going to be a lot for Asakura. It does mean he's a little bit bigger than Alexander Pantoja, which can play into his favor during this fight, even though the odds makers seem to think so. But what most people don't realize is how big of a star Asakura is. He's got over 1 million subscribers on YouTube, more than Sean O'Malley, with half the posts compared to Sean O'Malley. He's absolutely massive in Japan, right? Yeah, in Japan. His record doesn't speak like crazy numbers. He's 21-4. He's got 13 knockouts, 3 submissions in there. He's on a 2-fight winning streak. He does have a loss in what was it? Risen is where he came from. Risen, yeah. So he came from Risen. Big star there. Alexander Pantoja. The reason they kind of made this fight happen is he's kind of cleaned out the division already, in a sense. He's been Steve Erceg. He's been Brandon Royval, Brandon Moreno. It's kind of like, who does he fight next? Well, they found him an opponent. Asakura is who he's fighting next. Another fight I left blank on my notes because I don't know who to pick. I want to pick against Pantoja because I do like respect Asakura, but at the same time, he's a 2-1 underdog. I don't know him that well, and I don't want to like the odds makers know stuff that we don't, you know.
Yeah.
So I think he's a 2-1 favorite for a reason. Yeah, I think it's just going to be a very interesting fight. I think we're going to see Pantoja challenged quite a bit, or it's going to prove that the UFC is levels above every other fight promotion in the world. And they've proven that in the past, and they might prove it again. So we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens Saturday night.
Look, it's a win-win for the UFC either way to book the fight because Pantoja wins and dominates Asakura. Like you just said, it makes the UFC look great. It's like, hey, you got the biggest star from over there coming from a weight class higher that's coming down and then gets, backpacked by the flyweight champion. It's good for Pantoja. It's good for the UFC. It validates everything that they're doing over here. You bring a guy like Asakura over, who's a huge star in Japan, as you mentioned, and then he beats Pantoja in his first UFC fight, a fucking star is born. You have a guy that pulls in real numbers for flyweight. It might be in a totally different market, but it pulls in real numbers for the company. That's huge. So it's a win-win for them to book this fight. Kai Asakura's story is awesome about how he got into MMA. Apparently, he was fighting his.
I saw that.
He was like in a street fight with his brother, who like challenged him to a fight, and his brother was like famous for like challenging people to fights, and he goes in and him and his brother fight, and then that's sort of how he got into it. Dude's a dog. He's awesome. His story is great, and I think he's got a fun personality. In terms of who's going to win, in terms of who's going to put my money on, I'll just be honest, like it's really hard to say because I don't know how to stack up his competition against Pantoja's competition and the people that Pantoja has beaten, that I've seen Pantoja beat dominantly and effectively. It's hard for me to bet against Pantoja in this scenario simply because I don't know enough about Kai Asakura's the resume of his opponents. I want Asakura to win. I think it would be an awesome story. I think I want to see something spectacular. But my money says Pantoja is the safe bet here, and I just wouldn't want to advise anybody to take to bet otherwise, just because I think it's just the safest bet. And I could see like backpack submission being like a very, very smart play here.
I think the one, like the main negative factor I have against Asakura is I've seen some clips of his fights, and it looks like Rizin has like a completely different set of MMA rules.
He also lost to Manel Kopp, if that matters to you. He lost to Manel Kopp.
I saw that as well.
Yeah.
But no, like Rizin, I believe, is fought in a ring, right? Not an octagon.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So that gives a lot more leeway, right? Like you can use the ropes to your advantage. You can't use the cage to your advantage in that same way. But in Rizin, it looks like you could just fucking kick any way you want. Like there's just like grounded opponents. You're like stomping them. You got like soccer kicks, like fucking WWE style, man. I don't know. So it means that he's used that to win in the past. He can't use that to win anymore. So the question is, how good is he without it, with this different set of rules? But I think he is going to be a very solid opponent. I think we're going to see a very good fight, a very good technical fight on Saturday night.
Agreed.
And it has the potential of making the most boring division historically in the UFC to one of the more exciting ones in the UFC. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But anyway, next week we got UFC Tampa, which is also a great card. You got Joaquin Buckley taking on Colby Covington. Hopefully I'm going to be there. Hopefully you're going to be at UFC 310, but we'll see what's happening. And yeah, anyways, it's been great, brother. I know it's a long episode, but there's some great fights.
It's a good card
next week. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys.